After 2 decades, we have a UN High Seas Treaty, and there's hope for protecting the ocean and international waters. But there is an important step that needs to be taken. The treaty needs to be ratified by all of the countries. That could be harder than we think. There are a great number of reasons to ratify this treaty, though. Specifically 4 important actions that will help the world and its oceans. Therefore, it is time that people of the countries who need to ratify this treaty tell their politicians to ratify this bill. It's time to speak up, folks. We need to talk about the important points in this treaty and why we should be hopeful. That's on this episode of How to Protect the Ocean. Let's start the show. Not the podcast, but it is a podcast, so let's just start it. All right, here we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Loon, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And today, your action is needed. After 2 decades, 2 long and hard decades, we finally have a UN High Seas Treaty. This is huge, folks. This is huge. And I'm going to just preface this, and you're probably going to see a lot of criticism for this treaty. It is not perfect. I'm going to tell you that right now. It is not perfect, and it needs to build into something greater. But the fact that we actually have a treaty that parties that from a number of different countries agreed on is huge. Okay. It still needs to be ratified, meaning that needs to be voted that like for each country to say, hey, we're going to listen to this treaty. But it's a big thing. There are a lot of steps, including 4 sort of steps or regulations or whatever you want to call them in the treaty that could be huge for the ocean if done properly. Right? So although we have a treaty and we've done a lot of the big work, there still needs to be a lot more work that needs to be done. That's just the way it goes. We need to ensure that this thing keeps going at all times, and we need to make sure that it gets ratified. Okay? Because this is, like I said, I can't tell you how huge this is. The last time we had an agreement was 40 years ago, when the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea was put into effect, for which the U.S. has never ratified. It's an international treaty on ocean protection signed over 40 years ago, and the U.S. still never ratified the treaty, right? And that's being used in a lot of places. People are learning about it in school. When you learn about policy and international law of the ocean, you are looking at the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. But not all countries, including the U.S., have actually gone for it. And so that is a big deal. That's something that, we need to be careful of how this treaty is ratified or who ratifies this treaty. Everybody needs to ratify it because we need to protect our oceans. Look, our oceans are going crazy in terms of problems. We have plastic pollution. We have overfishing. We have climate change. We have water pollution. Right? There's a number of different things in there that they all have their own set of problems. And when you look at them from a cumulative impact, it's even worse. Before we get into sort of the 4 things that I love about this treaty, we need to talk about why the high seas are the high seas and what we mean by high seas. Some of you who are just listening for the first time may not know what it is. Or some of you who have been listening for a long time may not remember what it is. I've talked about it before, I've defined it before, but I think we need to define what high seas actually means and why this treaty is so important. And to know what high seas really mean is you have to look at each country and their territory of the ocean, what they can actually look after for each country. So how much of the ocean do they get? It's essentially 200 nautical miles off their shore. So each country has a boundary of about 200 nautical miles around its coastline. From the coastline out 200 nautical miles, depending on how far that coastline goes out. And they basically own that piece of ocean and anything that lies underneath. They regulate it. Okay? It belongs to them. People cross that 200 nautical mile barrier or boundary, and it could cause war. I remember when I was younger in the 90s, I think I was in high school, and our Canadian Coast Guard was going out to our 200 nautical mile border because there were Portuguese and I believe Spanish fishing fleets that were just outside our border trying to catch cod. Like, that was a big deal. You know, it's not as if we were going to go to war over it, but it was close. So that boundary is basically you're going from international water to a national water. And if you're not welcomed in, that could mean some trouble for the boat. It could mean some trouble for war, right? In Indonesia, when a fishing fleet comes in, fishing boats come into their 200 nautical mile zone, and they come in and they fish and they're not supposed to, the Indonesian Navy will sink you after giving a couple of warnings, maybe one. And they'll sink you, and they've done it, and they continue to do it, right? But it's their borders. It's their oceans. That's what belongs to them. Now, when you look beyond the 200 nautical miles, so not inside the 200 nautical mile between the shore and the 200 nautical mile boundary, when you look beyond that, that's when we're talking about international waters. Those are what we refer to as the high seas. The high seas are essentially everything beyond 200 nautical miles from the shore. That is international waters. At this point, it's pretty much non-regulated. The article that I saw on NPR defined sort of who regulates it as a number of sort of patchwork agreements, patchwork organizations that look after this area. And it's not done well. It's very difficult to enforce. Not a lot of countries agree with it, agree with these little patchy agreements, and so they don't actually work. So essentially, when you're in the high seas, when you're in international waters, you can do pretty much whatever you want. That's where we get fishery slaves. We get crazy overfishing, right? We get pretty much, you can dump anything. You can ram boats. You can do whatever you want. You will not get in trouble unless a country really takes offense to it. But this is where we're at. This is what we're at a point right now where the high seas are just unregulated. So you can do anything you want, and they do anything you want. It's already hard to regulate certain areas. It's already hard to enforce certain areas. But without an agreement with all the countries, a treaty, a high seas treaty, there was nothing we could do about the high seas. It's very difficult from a legal perspective to do anything. So now we're doing it. Now we've got a treaty. Once it's ratified, we can put it into place. And there are 4 things that I really liked about this treaty that were highlighted in this NPR article, which I'll link to link in the show notes. But here are the 4 things. It'll allow for marine protected areas, large-scale marine protected areas, to be placed in the high seas. So remember that 30 by 30, protect 30% by 2030? That could happen in the high seas. We could protect 30% of the high seas, which is a large area, right? And be able to have large-scale marine protected areas in the high seas. That you have the ability now to protect fish, protect marine mammals, to protect sea turtles, to protect ocean resources and important areas in the ocean from sort of degradation of any sort, right? Which would normally be human activities, like human extractive activities, potentially deep sea mining, which we talked about recently, oil and gas drilling, which we talked about recently, right? Even renewable energy, if it's even going to be placed in the high seas, which I doubt, right? But all those, and fishing, of course. Anything that humans can extract or degrade because of extraction can be protected within the boundaries of a marine protected area, the sort of imaginary boundaries of a marine protected area. So the good news is we can get 30%, like before when we talked about 30 by 30 was 30% of national waters. So each country was able to protect 30% or had the goal of protecting 30% of their own waters. But now we can have protection outside of those waters, right? 30% of those waters, which is the majority of the ocean, right? When you talk about protecting the ocean, look, that's the high seas is the majority of the ocean. 200 nautical miles for each country is not as much as you think, especially when you look at, 70% of the planet that's covered by ocean. So that's the good news of that. Now, the bad news of that is there needs to be enforcement of these marine protected areas. Who enforces them? How is it enforced? And do they actually have the legal binding to do it? According to this treaty, they would, from what I know. So it's still going to be a challenge to be able to enforce this large area, right? 24/7, but you could possibly do it. So that's going to be the big challenge. The other challenge is like, who has protection over it? Who has the right over it, right? It's going to be multiple countries. Like we saw how hard it was to put marine protected areas in the Antarctic, which is sort of governed by about 24, 25 different countries. They're been able to put some in. The Ross Sea MPA is in there. But others, the Eastern Arctic MPAs haven't been ratified yet, haven't been agreed upon yet. That's going to be, that has always been more difficult. So here we go again with, it's going to be more difficult to establish an MPA, but eventually there's going to be an MPA established, a large scale one in the high seas, and it's going to be the first of its kind, and it's going to be very interesting to see. But I'm excited. I'm excited for that part. I'm a marine protected area guy. It's what I studied in school. It's what I did for graduate work. I'm a huge proponent of it, especially if it's done properly. And to see that we could do it in the high seas, huge, huge win. The second thing is that it'll regulate countries and companies who can access and benefit from the sharing of the commercialization of marine genetic resources. So right now, if a country has the money or a company has the money, they can go anywhere in the high seas and pretty much extract whatever they want. And when we're talking about marine genetic resources, we're talking about pharmaceuticals. There's a lot of push to look into the ocean to help people from a medical standpoint, right? In the form of a pill, in the form of an injection, in the form of medicine, right? Maybe help treat cancer. I know a lot of sharks and are being observed and researched for their ability to fight off cancer cells, right? You have corals, clams, all sorts of animals that that we don't really know of that are being used in research and experiments. They're components to be able to provide medicine for us, for humans. Now, right now, if the country had the money or the company had the money, they can keep it for themselves and that's it. Well, there are going to be rules and regulations around that now, that it's not just going to be used for, that one particular country or company. It's going to be shared. That's going to be interesting to see how they do this. But that's going to be a big point. You're looking at sharing with developing countries, right? Sharing the technology, maybe sharing a piece of what they find, especially if it's close to an underdeveloped country or a developing country, right? You want to make sure that they can benefit because it's so close to them. They just didn't have the resources to go get it. So that'll be interesting to see how that pans out. I don't know from what legal framework they are able to do. I guess it's in this treaty, but it's something that's pretty cool. The third thing is research conducted in the high seas will be more accessible and inclusive, especially for developing countries. So we're seeing a big pattern here, that information, research, resources that are extracted or that are gained from different countries and companies are going to be shared. We're going to get inclusion for every country, or for the countries that are in the region where this work is going to go, because the region can benefit, right? Imagine, a scientist or a group of scientists go in and start looking and observing the benefits of having mangroves in place compared to the benefits of not having mangroves in place when it comes to natural disasters like tsunamis or wave action sort of storms where, hurricane cyclones and so forth. Well, if they just go back and publish on that, and they don't, when you publish a paper in a primary journal, not everybody has access to that, especially people from developing countries can't pay. I mean, I can't pay. I live in Canada. I can't afford to pay for all these different papers, like $40 here, $40 there. The subscriptions are like tens of thousands of dollars. Not every country can afford that. So they don't get access to the work that was done near their country that would benefit their countries, right, or their regions. So work like that will be shared, and so that other countries can benefit from that research, which is really what science is all about anyway, right? The fact that we publish behind paywalls is really ridiculous, even though we don't have choice as scientists. I've never published anything, but that's what it looks like, and a lot of people are not happy about it. And the fourth thing that we're going to cover today is setting global standards for environmental impact assessments on commercial activities. Now, this is a good one. I know a lot of people, I don't know if you know a lot about environmental impact assessments or environmental assessments in general. But generally what happens when you're doing some kind of development, or a developer's coming in, or somebody like who has like an industrial or is going to be able to profit off of the commercialization of what they're doing. So whether it be drilling for oil or gas, mining, developing along the coastline, they have to do an impact assessment, not only in the water, but on land. And so having that impact assessment is really important. In fact, if you don't do it properly, just like we talked about with the Willow Project, governments and courts can hold you to it saying, hey, this impact assessment is not up to scruff. You need to go back and do more, and this is what you need to do. So it gives, environmentalists, it gives advocates, it gives people who are interested in protecting the ocean a basis to say, hey, they've done their due diligence, this company, and so we believe them, or they haven't done their due diligence, right? And the impact assessment is crap, and they need to redo it. So that's going to be a really important part, because just think, if you want to fish in a particular area, you will probably have to do an impact assessment, environmental impact assessment. How is it going to impact? How much are you going to take? Right? Set those quotas. Because if you set it too high, or you don't set any quotas at all, scientists are going to come in. It's like, well, in the impact assessment, you never set any quotas. You never did any modeling of the fish assessment, the fish stock. How do we know you're not going to run out of it? How do you know you're not just going to come in, fish, and who cares about what's left over, and leave? You just see the size of some of these tankers they have now for fishing and for just holding fish. They're massive, right? They're like the size of shopping malls. They can decimate populations within years if they wanted to. So the fact that they have to do an impact assessment now, or they might have to do an impact assessment now with this UN High Seas Global Treaty, now we're talking. Now we're talking accountability. Now we're talking assessing and getting information on these global populations, these international water populations of fish and other things that can really help us protect the ocean. Right? How much bycatch are you going to use? How many sharks are you going to catch? How many sea turtles are you going to catch? How many marine mammals are you going to catch in bycatch? Right? I'm not sure if you've ever saw, there was a video. It's quite funny, actually, if you think about it, but it's kind of scary at the same time. There's a video somewhere in the Pacific. A trawl ship is bringing up its catch in the trawl. And as it has the trawl net on the side of the boat, and it's just at the surface, right? The opening of the net. And all of a sudden, you see this sea lion just jet out, like just fly out of this net. And you're like, oh, he just wanted to escape. And you're just like, wow, like that's cool. Like it just wanted to escape. But it looks like it's going pretty fast. Like he found, or he or she found its way out of the net, and it just bolted for it. And then about 5 to 10 seconds later, you see this massive great white shark, I believe, come out of the net, because the people were trying to get the shark out of the net. Probably eating fish, may have tried to chase a sea lion in there. But that sea lion was hightailing out of there because there was this massive shark in the net. And when you think about that part, it's like, it's kind of funny. Then you start thinking about, it's like, how many times does this happen? How many times does it matter? It was like a 15 to 16 foot shark, maybe bigger. And it got caught in this net, and it would have died if they brought it out of the water. Right? And we don't know if fishers will do that on a regular basis, is try and get it out, or just bring it up, kill it, and that's it. Chop it up and eat it, right? Or sell it. We have no idea what happens in the high seas. We have no clue. This will provide some sort of background. Like I said, it's not perfect, right? But it's better than nothing. And it's pretty good because people have been working on it for 2 decades. So it might be watered down a little bit. I'm going to admit that. But it's a start, and we need to build on it quickly, right? But first we need to get it ratified. And this is where the call to action comes out. It doesn't matter where you live in the world. It doesn't matter where you're listening to this. You could be listening to this in South America. You'd be listening to this in Africa. You'd be listening to Australia and Europe and Asia and North America. Call or contact your government representative at the local, at the federal, at the state or provincial level, depending on how your government's set up. Please talk to your MPs about this, or your member of parliament, or your government member. Please tell them how important this is for you. Tell them that this is part of why you elected them into place, if that's the reason. Tell them this is what you want. Tell them if you love the ocean, you want to protect the ocean. Right now, on Fridays, we talk about how to live for a better ocean by taking action. This is the action you take. The action you take is you ask your government to be like, please consider this. Make sure that this government, which would be federal government, I assume, ratifies this treaty. Because we need this. We need to be on this. This is history. And Canada, the US, Australia, the UK, India, Brazil, all the countries need to be a part of this, just like the Paris Accord agreement. We all need to be a part of this for this to work. So every country needs to ratify that. So that's your call to action. If you have any questions or you feel inspired and you want to do something more, please feel free to contact me at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram, at How to Protect the Ocean, all one word, on Instagram. Or you can email me by going to speakupforblue.com. That's speakupforblue.com. And you just go to the Contact Us page, fill out the form. That goes right to my business email, directly to me, and I will answer you as soon as I can. But that's it for today's episode. Be happy, be hopeful going into this weekend. And for those of you who are on spring break or March break like we are here in Ontario, enjoy your March break. I will still be publishing. And my kids are going away, so they're having a good time. My wife and I are staying here with the dogs. They're going with friends. Don't worry, they're not going on their own. They're too young to go on their own without having fun with their parents. Anyway, but that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Have a safe weekend. Enjoy. Share this episode. Share this podcast with people you think will love it. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.